I'd like to introduce right now one of our keynote speakers, Mr. Dan Prieto. He's an executive at the public sector cloud at Google. He leads the strategy and thought leadership for Google Cloud public sector. He has served as a senior policymaker at the White House, the Pentagon, and on Capitol Hill. So over to you, Dan. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I want to thank Billington for having me here, and I think it's an interesting time to ask questions about where we are in cybersecurity from a broader historic sweep. So I'll start with a story. 4 years ago this summer, the morning of July 8th, 2015, actually, I was sitting at my desk at the White House, inside the SCIF for the National Security Council CyberSecurity Directorate. My phone rang. It was my wife. She typically doesn't call me at work, so I picked up. And she just, without even saying hello, she goes, "What is going on over there?" Our phones had been ringing off the hook all morning. Email had been exploding. If people remember, all United Airlines flights in the US had been grounded since that morning. The New York Stock Exchange had halted trading, and by this point in the morning, the Wall Street Journal homepage went down. The staff were making and taking calls from DHS, Treasury, FBI, and the FAA. The Chief of Staff at the White House, the Homeland Security Advisor, everyone was asking questions. When I got home that night, I talked to my wife about it, and I said to her, when did we fall asleep and wake up in the future, where we presumed that computer outages were the result of some nefarious James Bond-like bad actor behind the scenes? The same question is worth asking today as the internet turned 30, the World Wide Web turned 30 in 2019. And I think what I want to talk about in the context of a call to action is going into the fourth decade of the internet. Can we turn the tide on security issues? Can we digitally transform and also transform how we do security? How do you do that? What is the opportunity? What role does cloud play, specifically cloud-native security capabilities, analytics, and AI and ML? Now let's look back over the 30 years. The 90s, I think, was a decade of promise and potential. A hopeful and exciting time, creation of global community. The internet is a force for good. Netscape, Amazon, Yahoo, Google, all were created. The 2000s, a decade characterized by the rise of social and mobile, a boom cycle from a commercial perspective. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, all created. The 2010s I characterize as a period of insecurity. Rising cyber vulnerability, breaches growing year after year, growing privacy concerns, insider threats, autocrats, surveillance, disinformation, a rise in bold and aggressive nation states. Think Snowden in 2013, the North Korea hacks in 2014, the OPM breach in 2015, and the 2016 election meddling. For the first time, people started questioning the internet, strategic asset or strategic liability. According to the World Economic Forum in 2018, cyber attacks, cyber war are a top cause of disruption in the next 5 years, only after natural disasters and extreme weather. So the fourth decade of the internet, in my mind, will be a decade of reckoning, a decade of potential transformation when it comes to security, and the opportunity is there. But it is not certain that we will succeed in that decade. And it's not for a lack of technology capability. The challenges are mostly around people, the complexities of culture and organizational change that come with the adoption of cloud. So as we think about that fourth decade, let's do a little vector check on where we are exactly sort of on the cusp between the third and fourth decade in 2019. From a cybersecurity perspective, finance, healthcare, manufacturing, retail, and government remain the top targets. There have certainly been some improvements. The global mean dwell time, how long adversaries stay on your network on average, is down 23% from last year, according to FireEye, down 66% since 2013. Federal agencies saw a 12% decrease in cybersecurity incidents between fiscal year 17 and 18, and no major incidents occurred on government networks in 2018. At the same time, there are challenges and shifts. Supply chain attacks are up 78%. There's an increased interest in operating technology and control systems with real interest in creating disruptive effects with physical consequences. There's an increase in counter-incident response, where the top technique is log destruction, and there's also an increase in retargeting, up 14% to 64% of all incidents evaluated are often now retargeting even after you've cleared adversaries off your network already. So in decade 4, what's at stake? Where are we in the calculus of attacker advantage versus defender advantage? In general, attackers have always tended to have the advantage, but according to CrowdStrike, The time to breakout, from the time an adversary gets an initial beachhead in your networks to moving laterally to other systems, the Russian average breakout time is 18 minutes. 18 minutes. The North Koreans are down to 2 hours and 20 minutes. The Chinese are at 4 hours. The Iranians are at 5 hours. And your run-of-the-mill criminal or terrorist group is at around 9 hours. So if that's where the adversaries are, where is the average enterprise? Average enterprises continue to struggle with too many things on their plate, too many things in their job jar. Small organizations typically have 15 to 20 cyber tools installed. Large organizations up to 150 to 200 tools installed on average. And according to some surveys, nearly half of the security risks that organizations face stems from a proliferation of security vendors and security products, because that proliferation of things in the job jar make it hard to have comprehensive and strategic visibility. There's an excess of alerts generated by an excess of technologies, and it makes it a challenge for analysts to identify genuine threats from false alerts. They suffer from alert fatigue and burnout, while genuine threats slip through the cracks. There's a flood of data with poor visibility, and that lack of visibility is the greatest impediment to incident response. The average cyber analyst takes 45 minutes to evaluate a single alert. The average analyst spends only 1 to 2 hours per day identifying and countering real intrusions. 70 to 90% of their time is wasted on manual integration of data from across multiple systems and wading through false alerts. All of this complexity for the cyber defenders is challenged by an explosion of devices and data. IoT devices will triple to 75 billion by the year 2025. Data holdings are growing by around 40 to 50% per year. There will be 175 zettabytes of data by 2025. So in the fourth decade, what do we do? I have a couple of observations about what I don't think will work. We will not be able to hire our way out of the problem. There is a secular global shortage of cyber talent, AI talent, big data analytics talent, and that shortage is in the hundreds of thousands to millions. There is no way for government organizations or private sector organizations to simply hire enough people to solve the problem. We will also not spend our way out of the problem. Adding more tools is too often a one-way ratchet. What's the new cyber technique? Let's buy a new tool. Let's add to the toolkit. But again, remember, big organizations, 150 to 200 cyber tools installed. The big question is, can you ever get to the point where you have the confidence to take tools away, to simplify, to streamline, to create more clarity for the analyst and less fog, less complexity? I also know that layering on more compliance and standards will also not solve the problem. Compliance is too often used as a proxy for security, as a proxy for risk management. And as Grant Schneider said, it is critical, but at the same time, compliance tends to lag technology. It does not make our organizations and our cyber defenders more nimble. Controls are rarely evaluated and prioritized for efficacy against real-world exploits, which allows you to triage compliance controls, which allows you to say, look, I don't have enough time to do all 200, 300, 400 of them, but you know what? If I do this subset, that is the most efficacious thing to do. So my call to action is to change the operating model of cyber over the next decade, using cloud to drive radical transformation and productivity for the cyber defender workforce. Take things off their plate, rethink public-private partnerships with the hyperscale cloud providers, and turn over core security capabilities to the right cloud provider partner. For example, too many organizations spend too much time trying to roll their own multi-factor authentication. Can you turn that over to the cloud provider? Default encryption. Nearly 60% of companies lack an enterprise-wide encryption strategy, and only 16% of agencies have achieved government-wide targets for encrypting data at rest. In Google Cloud, that encryption in transit and at rest is by default. On the identity side, it is by default with our enterprise customers to have hard token multi-factor authentication, context-aware access. So the prerequisite of taking stuff off your plate, this is a challenge, because this would be a massive culture shift, where 60 to 70% of respondents say, you know what, the biggest barrier to my cloud adoption are security concerns. And it's not because the cloud is less secure, but it is because it is such a large cultural shift from the way that we have traditionally done IT and the way we have traditionally done IT security. Second, in addition to taking stuff off your plate, use the cloud to get to a place in terms of scale and agility that organizations are not able to get to on their own. Data warehouse projects for big data analytics that are done on-prem are 60 to 70% more likely to fail, and they tend to run 60 to 70% higher on the cost side. With many of our big data analytics customers, the increase in efficiency and productivity is staggering. We have customers in the Fortune 50 using our capabilities on their supply chain for global liquidity settlement, large banks. And we also have large customers using it for large-scale data analytics on the cyber side. And what on average we've seen is an increased ability to use more data, a 30-fold increase in the data that they can ingest, at the same time reducing processing times and analytics times by over 98%. And that is across industries and across multiple use cases. In addition, use the cloud, machine learning, AI to strengthen your ability to find signal from noise in this massive data, increase automation, correlate multiple signals across the complex data that is coming at cyber analysts. Automate so you have lateral visibility and better predictability across the kill chain to see account takeover, lateral movement, exfiltration. And it's not looking for needles in haystacks, it's looking for correlation across multiple points. There's never going to be a silver bullet, but you get better at having insight and foresight in what's happening in your environment. Finally, we need to continue to push to get cyber out of the shadows of being something that is relegated to IT. Now, we've done a good job improving on this front, particularly since the Target breach in 2013 and the OPM breach in 2015, when non-technical lead executives lost their jobs after major breaches. But awareness and recognition is not the same as, to borrow a phrase from General Nakasone, it's not the same as persistent engagement on cybersecurity from non-technical executives. And there is still a problem. I think it's the problem of the disconnect between the IT side of the house and the business and mission side of the house. If any of you have read the book, The First Digital War, Worm, The First Digital War by Mark Bowden, who wrote Black Hawk Down, within the first chapter, there is a paragraph that really captures this disconnect. And IT professionals, he said, know this look. He calls the look the glaze. The unmistakable look of profound confusion and uninterest that descends whenever a conversation turns to the inner workings of a computer. Even people who spend hours every day with their fingers on keyboards, whose livelihoods and even leisure time increasingly depend on fluency and variety, with a variety of software, remain utterly clueless about how any of it works. Worse, the innards of mainframes and operating systems and networks are considered not just unfathomable, but somehow unknowable, or not even worth knowing in the way that many people are content to regard electricity as voodoo. So you really need to find a focal point to get non-technical executives engaged in the business of cybersecurity. And one example I can think of is post the OPM breach, the government-wide exercise we did to identify and prioritize crown jewels, high-value IT assets. It was a focal point for CXO interaction, not just CIOs, not just CISOs, but both technical and non-technical. Between the National Security Council and OMB, we drove a process that included non-technical executives as well. It included press shops, it included lawyers, it included folks on the business side, CFO shops, really bringing cyber into the fold of overall enterprise risk. And what was interesting about it is that in the first couple months of this exercise, a lot of the CIOs, you could tell they were not comfortable with this exercise. A lot of them were like, I don't want the White House looking over my shoulder about my systems. But after another couple months, 2 federal department CIOs came up to me and pulled me aside and said, you know what? I wanted nothing to do with this exercise, but I'm actually happy that we've gone through this process, because for the first time, the secretary of my department stops me in the hall. He knows what our high-value assets are. He knows the impact on their business, and he asks me if I have everything that I need. And that was transformational in the ability to communicate out of what is traditionally the black box of technology up to the mission, the board level if you're not in government, to the secretary level, and to have business executives care about cyber and care about IT. In the 4th decade of the net, of the internet, though, as we look forward to this challenge of transformation, this is not assured. We are 10 years into the cloud journey. The cloud-first strategy came out almost 10 years ago, and US government cloud penetration as a percent of total IT spend is still less than 7%. If it's a baseball game, we aren't even out of the first inning. How do we accelerate that? How do we accelerate that, particularly when up to 70% still see security as the biggest barrier to cloud adoption? What's interesting as well is that Gartner has indicated that through 2022, at least 95% of cloud security failures will be the customer's fault. Misconfigurations are the largest cause of breaches. I also believe that given how much hype and promise there has been around cloud with a lot of the modernization strategies, there is a risk of cloud backlash. If the cloud doesn't achieve out of the gate the things that people are expecting, the big promises. So the technology is there. The challenge is there for organizations and cultures to change, to adopt the cloud, to change and transform their operating model of security, to rethink what a public-private partnership looks like with the hyperscale cloud providers. But again, it's not certain that we're going to get there. With that, I'll close on a quote from Bill Gates. We always overestimate the change that will occur in the next 2 years and underestimate the change that will occur in the next 10. I think that's the moment that we're at. We're at a moment to make critical decisions, to get agreement across the C-suite, and to make bold moves to leverage the cloud to transform our cyber operating models. And if we succeed, I think the fourth decade of the internet can be called the transformational era, an era of reckoning in response to the third decade of the internet, which again I characterized as an era of extreme insecurity. Thank you very much.